So, listen to this. I think nothing shocks football fans more than when some rich kid turns out to be a football prodigy and then just throws his career away because he just doesn't care about football that much. But there's one story I've seen that's even stranger than that, because in reality, the biggest offender when it comes to this isn't even a player, it's the manager, and you know him. I'm talking about André Villas Boas. His career was crazy, but his life was 10 times worse. He was born as literal royalty. At 17 years of age, he became friends with Bobby Robson. At 21, he was already a national team manager. At 33, he had won a treble, created maybe the greatest team we've seen in decades outside of the top 5 leagues, became the most expensive manager of all time, and convinced everyone he was the next Mourinho. Only to then quickly fall out of love with the sport, disappear, come back up as a rally driver, and severely injure himself in a race, leading him to make a rampant comeback to football that fizzled out even faster than before. And when it truly seemed that he was about to be gone for good, he comes back and faces off against the most powerful man in Portuguese football history in a desperate attempt to save his childhood club. But well, I just said a lot, and there's a lot more to say, so let's get into it. So, first of all, you must be asking, what do you mean he's royalty? Well, his great-grandfather was a count, his great-grandfather's brother was also a baron, and their father even held both titles. So, yeah, let's just say that, as you might imagine, he was born into a very wealthy family. And with football being far too plebeian for such people, the family's hobby of choice was motorsports, which was how, at 17, Villas Boas ended up breaking his arm and being forced to stay inside, alone and bored in their gated community. And in the midst of all that boredom, he recognized an old gentleman waiting by the elevator. It was none other than Bobby Robson, the manager of FC Porto. And look, no matter what the rest of the family thought of football, Villas Boas was obsessed with FC Porto. That club was maybe the one thing he loved more than motorsports, and of course, being the know-it-all he's always been, from there on out, he made sure to stand by the elevator every day, waiting for Mr. Robson to arrive home so he could give him a piece of his mind regarding his tactics. And one day, half frustrated, half impressed by the kid's resilience and wit, Robson told him, "Tomorrow, be here at 9, you're coming with me to training, I'll show you around." And before you knew it, Robson was using his connections to bend the rules so that the kid could get his own coaching license despite the fact he was still underage. However, convincing his parents to let him skip out on college and move to England wasn't even the biggest problem, because the issue wasn't even the money that would cost. That was no biggie for them, as you might imagine. The issue was, as Villas Boas would put it himself, back then, having a son working in football wasn't a good look. Still, despite being a literal child among 40-year-olds, he finished the course in record time, and faster than anyone could imagine, he was working as an analyst at Porto, rubbing shoulders with Robson and Mourinho. But soon, well, the duo departed to Barcelona, and I'm guessing Villas Boas got a little lonely at Porto, because one day, his subscription of the FA's Managers Association magazine arrived in the mail. He flipped through the pages and found an advert for a spot as the British Virgin Islands director of football. And with the island being famous for being a great sailboating location, which happens to be a mandatory hobby for the effortlessly wealthy, Villas Boas fell in love with the idea, so he got on a plane, hid the fact that he was 21 from everyone, and somehow got the job. However, I don't think he quite realized just how amateur things were there. He literally arrived in a suit and then was greeted by the federation's president wearing shorts and flip-flops. And then he proceeded to explain to him that there were about 5 teams on the island, and they were like the police department's team, or a team entirely made up of Jamaican immigrants. It might as well have been a married versus singles match. Regardless, despite the fact they had only won one official match in their history up till then, it somehow led them to 5-0 wins over Anguilla and Puerto Rico. But eventually, a 9-0 defeat to Bermuda proved to be too harsh for him to handle, so he packed his bags and went back to Porto begging for a job as a youth coach, where he would end up staying for a while. In fact, he stayed until 2003, which was a fun year for Porto, as it was precisely the year when Mourinho arrived and presented Villas Boas with the offer that jump-started everything. He offered him a place as his scout, or as Mourinho called him, his spy. Villas Boas would go out, find ways into the other team's training grounds, take notes, and provide Mourinho with a full analysis every week. Mourinho was a master of the dark arts of football, and with Villas Boas doing his dirty work, he won it all. When it seemed impossible for a team outside of the top 5 leagues to conquer Europe, Mourinho proved everyone wrong and Villas Boas was watching and learning because he planned to do the same one day. By the time the two got to Inter, Villas Boas was Mourinho's right-hand man. No decision Mourinho made went unchecked, but still, Villas Boas craved for more, and once Sporting de Braga was left without a coach, Villas Boas pounced at the chance to secure the spot, but Braga ended up picking someone else, leading him to walk back to Milan with his tail between his legs. Regardless, at this point, Mourinho already felt betrayed. Their relationship was never the same, and soon, Villas Boas left for good, becoming the manager of a mid-table Portuguese club, Académica. Obviously, going from Inter Milan and Chelsea to Académica was a move everyone doubted, but really, it was the move that made his career. When he arrived, they were at the very bottom of the table. In fact, they hadn't won a game in 5 months. But not only did that change right on his first match at the club, but after 9 matches at the wheel, he had only lost to Porto and Benfica, and by the end of the season, he had taken them to 11th place, 10 points above the relegation zone, even getting them within inches of the League Cup finals. Suddenly, his talent was no longer a secret. Villas Boas was the new Portuguese boy wonder, and just as with Mourinho 8 years before at União de Leiria, even though by then he already had a pre-agreement with Sporting CP, Porto hijacked the move and took a gamble on the new Mourinho. The day he met the squad, he didn't say anything. He walked into the room and played a video of Benfica celebrating the league title the year before. Mourinho couldn't have done it any better. The message was clear, the players had a license to kill. And speaking about the players, we gotta talk about this team. When Villas Boas offloaded Bruno Alves and Raul Meireles, everyone got a bit quiet. Sure, the 35 million he cashed in was nice, but they were two club legends gone in the same window. Who the hell were Porto supposed to rely on now? Well, first of all, Villas Boas hijacked the transfer of an 18-year-old offensive midfielder from Colombia who seemed bound to sign for Benfica. His name was James Rodriguez. The price tag was a mere 6 million euros. Then, with Sporting CP complaining that their former wonder kid midfielder had turned out to be nothing more than a rotten apple, Villas Boas took him out of their hands for only 11 million. His name was João Moutinho. And finally, for nothing more than 4 million euros, he signed a virtually unknown centre-back from Argentina, Nicolás Otamendi. But sure, you may say that 3 signings aren't enough to turn a team around, no matter how incredible they are, and you're right, but the thing is, first of all, Porto already had a strong core. Players like Fernando, Guarín, Rolando, Álvaro Pereira and Elton were absolute rocks. Hell, Falcão had just finished his debut season with 34 goals, but what made the difference was that Villas Boas managed to take all of them to the next level. Everyone in the team improved massively, and no one is a better example of that than Hulk. Before Villas Boas, Hulk had 19 goals in 2 years at Porto. He was one of the most inconsistent players I had ever seen. The highlight of his career at the club had been a 4-month ban for getting into a scrap with a bunch of Benfica players. But once Villas Boas arrived, it was like he just flipped a switch in his head. By the end of the season, Hulk had scored or assisted in 23 out of the 26 league matches he played. He was consistency personified. I'm talking 62 goal contributions in 4,400 minutes of football. And he wasn't even the only one pulling these kinds of numbers. Falcão finished the year with 45 goal contributions in 3,300 minutes. Even young James managed 24 contributions in just 1,800 minutes. Porto were easily the greatest offensive powerhouse to come from outside the top 5 leagues in the 21st century. No matter who you were back then, Villas Boas had put together a team that everyone was scared to face. In the league, they were unbeatable, and for once, that's not hyperbole. They played 30 matches and took 27 wins, 3 draws, and 0 defeats. Only once had that ever been achieved, and it was back when Eusebio was still around. Add to that the fact that they also broke the all-time points record and had the biggest margin of victory ever, being 21 points ahead of second place by the time the season was over, and it was easily the greatest league campaign in Portuguese history, which was only made sweeter by the fact that they demolished their rivals Benfica 5-0 in the first round, and then made sure to win the league in enemy turf, getting Benfica so upset that they turned off the lights and started blasting the sprinklers trying to stop the celebrations, which only made it that much more iconic. And keep in mind, Benfica were no slouches back then. They had Aimar, David Luiz, Coentrão, you get it. And on top of all of that, they obviously also went on to break the record for the biggest ever win in a Portuguese Cup final, beating Vitória 6-2 to take the trophy. And just like that, it was already the perfect season. But then, they took it all so much further, it's hard to even process. Because in the Europa League, they once again just demolished everyone. Right in the playoffs, they faced off against the Genk squad with Courtois and De Bruyne, and it was light work, 7-2 on aggregate. And the group stage was a similar situation, undefeated, 14 goals scored, and only 4 conceded. Then, in the early rounds of the knockouts, things got a bit tougher. First, they beat the kings of the Europa League themselves, Sevilla, on away goals, then 3-1 against CSKA Moscow, and then it was goals galore once more. 3 consecutive games scoring 5 goals, kicking Spartak and Villarreal out of the competition, with Falcao himself being involved in 12 goals just against those 2 teams. As Villas Boas himself would go on to say, that team was football porn. And with only Braga between them and the trophy, Falcao made sure to once again score the only goal, totaling 17 goals in the competition, the all-time record, while Villas Boas became the youngest ever manager to win an UEFA tournament, let alone a treble. And of course, to make justice to the claims that he was the second coming of Mourinho, once all of that was done, he made sure to follow his footsteps by joining Chelsea just like he did, for a world record fee of 15 million euros, just like he did. It was no wonder that by the time he got there, they were already calling him Special 2. However, what they didn't know at that moment was that the move was doomed from the start. The first sign had already arrived months earlier, before Porto had even won the league, with Villas Boas saying in a press conference, "I don't want to stay in football for much longer." These were words you would expect to hear from a 60-year-old manager hedging closer and closer to retirement, not from one of the most successful managerial prodigies in the history of the sport. It left everyone confused, but decades later, it explained all that happened. Chelsea paid my release clause, so it had to be. Otherwise, I would have never left Porto. What I felt for that team was different. I was more of a fan than a manager. I couldn't think of anything else. I was obsessed. I would go to sleep and dream of tactics and training schedules. I knew I would never feel that passion anywhere else. And once he got going at Chelsea, you could see that. André Villas Boas was never again the same man once he left Porto, and honestly, that wasn't all his fault. Everyone around him failed him. Abramovich, in proper Abramovich fashion, had promised him the world, but then, according to Villas Boas, it was one broken promise after the other. He had promised him he could bring at least 2 Porto players into the team, but they went for Hulk, Falcao, and even Álvaro Pereira, and missed out on every single one. Oh, and guess who was his other main target? Just big old Luka Modric. But yeah, Abramovich missed out because apparently 27 million was the most he'd be willing to spend on him. In fact, with only 80 million spent on transfers in that window, it was one of the worst financial backings Abramovich ever afforded a manager. Even Mourinho got to spend twice as much money on his debut season, nearly a decade earlier. And the worst is that even without much money, Villas Boas still managed to sign Mata, Lukaku, Meireles and Courtois, which is some seriously good business. Regardless, Abramovich wasn't even the main culprit behind this massive failure. The worst were the players. With Villas Boas looking to rejuvenate the squad, he began slowly finding replacements for the likes of Lampard, Terry and Drogba, but instead of doing their best to pass on the club's philosophy to the younger players and accepting their time was nearing its dawn, they instead rebelled against the manager, caused all sorts of chaos, and were ultimately responsible for how Villas Boas lost the dressing room. Before you knew it, all that passion Villas Boas was afraid of losing once he left Porto was dead and gone. There was no excitement left in his eyes, and the displays on the pitch reflected that. Chelsea were slow, boring and uninspiring, and once the fans began resenting him for not being able to live up to Mourinho's achievements, it became impossible to hold on. Villas Boas faced the chopping block. The new chapter was over only 8 months after its start, and it all felt much more bitter once Di Matteo came in, he grabbed the team by their bootstraps and dragged them to an unbelievable Champions League win in the 2 months that were left in the season. Honestly, knowing the context behind all of this, it wouldn't have surprised me if he had quit right then and there, but instead, he did the one other thing that was also guaranteed to kill his career. He signed for Tottenham, maybe the greatest manager graveyard in England. Still, somehow, the first year actually went pretty well. Not only did he leave Tottenham just 1 point off from qualifying to the Champions League for only the second time in 51 years, but he was also responsible for taking a 22-year-old Bale who was still somewhat tied to his role as a wingback and giving him the freedom he needed to become the most exciting young talent in the world. This sort of return to form was actually even enough to get the likes of Real Madrid and PSG to approach Villas Boas in the summer, but he decided to stay in. Sooner than later, he would suffer suffer the same fate as every other Tottenham manager, because once the market opened, Real Madrid broke the transfer record, snatched Bale away from London and completely destabilized the squad. So, knowing it would be damn near impossible to replace Bale, Villas Boas ended up signing 7 players with the money they made from his transfer, trying to find some way to make up for the void he left behind. But 4 months later, he had already agreed to leave the club, knowing his sacking was only a matter of time and never getting to turn his vision into a reality. Once asked about it, Villas Boas admitted that not taking the job at Real or PSG was the biggest regret of his career, and with his chapter almost becoming the final nail in his coffin, Villas Boas took a millionaire offer to manage Zenit and sailed into the sunset, staying there for 2.5 years, winning 3 titles in the process and leading the club to the most successful European campaigns in their history, before taking a massive payout once again, this time to manage Shanghai Porto FC in China, where his love for football finally died out, leading him to retire at 41 years old to finally pursue his other passion, motorsports, racing the Dakar Rally only a few months later, crashing out in the 4th stage and fracturing his spine. Suddenly, he didn't really know what to do. Neither football nor motorsports seemed to be paying him back for the blood, sweat and tears that he had poured into them. If once he struggled to decide what passion to follow, now he wasn't even sure what his passion, his true calling was. Years later, he even made a comeback to Marseille, posing a major threat to PSG's rule. But that didn't last long either, and for a while he pretty much disappeared. But one of the few things he said in one of the few interviews he was in felt like a premonition of what would happen next. He said, "My career decisions were always influenced by the restless child inside me, and the one thing that child yearned for, the one thing that would have him sitting beside an elevator for hours on the off chance that he'd get to speak to Sir Bobby for a minute. It wasn't football. It was FC Porto." And so, with the club in financial ruin, struggling to live up to the times of Villas Boas and Mourinho, the kid came up out of nowhere and announced that he was running for president of the club. But between him and a win at the elections was Pinto da Costa, Portuguese football's very own godfather who had ruled Porto for 41 years, the president with the most titles in football history. The kind of guy you don't want to mess with, except that, well, he was 86 years old now. As the conspiracy theories went, it was no longer him in charge. The reason the club was in ruins was that all the vultures around him had earned enough of his confidence to take over, using his image as a facade as they preyed upon whatever was left of the club. Huge bonuses, loans at massively inflated interest rates, and the only one who dared to face them was André Villas Boas. The prodigal son had returned. Many doubted it was possible for Pinto da Costa to ever come out on the losing side. He wasn't just a president, the man was the club itself. He had taken a club that had 2 league titles in 25 years and led them to absolute domestic dominance and European glory. Not voting for him, to many, felt like biting the hand that fed them, but with the club going up in flames, with results diminishing and the drama hitting all-time highs, once Villas Boas told the fans that, by the next elections, I will not be able to save us, it is now or never, they listened. They all listened. With 80% of the votes, it was the biggest bombshell to have hit Portuguese football in years. They say life is about finding something you love and letting it kill you. Villas Boas finally found that one thing. It is FC Porto.